Hey everybody, KC here. So one of the questions I've gotten a lot over the past year or so has been what I think of what's going on in Portland, Oregon. Anybody who's paid attention on Morning Newsbeat for the last 10 years or so knows that, for me, Portland, Oregon has always been sort of a home away from home. I have, for 7 or 8 years, I came out in the summer, taught at Portland State University. I'm adjunct there, continue to be. All the teaching now is remote. But clearly Portland has had its issues over the past year. Like every city has had issues. In some ways, Portland's have been exacerbated by the fact that, not only was COVID happening, but at the same time, you had a lot of the civil unrest that was taking place in the city. So Portland has had a bad time. And I've actually had a chance to spend just a couple of days here. I was out in the Pacific Northwest to do an actual live speech in Bend, Oregon. So I decided to spend a day or two in Portland just to kind of get a sense of it. And listen, in a quick video, I can't tell you, I can't give you a really accurate description or depiction of what's going on in Portland and what's happened and why it's happened or what to do about it. I'm not expert enough, I'm not capable of doing that. But I do find myself, as I walk the streets of Portland, feeling a couple of things. First of all, it's just sad. And the city seems sad. It's not a matter of being, it's not a lot of anger that I can feel, although, listen, there's some of that going on. I mean, the homeless problem here is enormous. And you can see it coming in on the train into the city. One of the things that you see is, encampments of homeless people. In certain places, they seem to have been cleared out. But in certain places, it's a really intense problem. And, there's a lot of places that have gone out of business. A lot of places I used to go to on a regular basis, have gone out of business. Some of them managed to hang on. Some have done a pretty good job of figuring out how to get their way through the pandemic and to deal with the issues created by the civil unrest. It's a city that's going to take some time to come back. I've talked to different friends of mine here. Some people think 4 or 5 years. Some people say 7 or 8 years. Some people say 10 years. A lot of that's going to depend on the political and governmental leadership and how they're able to kind of control the city and figure out how to get it moving forward instead of sort of staying mired in the same problems they seem to have had for a long time. And that was always my reaction, looking at a lot of things going on in Portland over the past year or so. It didn't seem any different, it just seemed heightened. There were always protests in Portland. They just kind of got a little bit more intense, dealing with a lot of the same issues that have always been a problem here. But listen, it's a tough place right now. It's not the same city that I used to come to. And would delight in spending 7-8 weeks a year here if it was a different kind of experience for me. Now, it's a different kind of experience, but it's not the kind of positive experience that I always used to have. And there are certain things that are going to stand out. A lot of it's looking at windows like this one, where there are 4 lease signs, and you see those everywhere. One of the interesting things you see in a city like this is, people are actually getting creative. And in some ways, I think COVID gave businesses the license to be creative. So this is a little pub I used to go to every once in a while, the Big Legralski, right? It was a great beer place, right? And it was pretty small, maybe 10 seats inside. Okay? It was like a little neighborhood pub. Tough times, but one of the things they've done is they actually created the Dude's Beer Garden. So, I gather at night. What they do here is they bring in music, and they also have people, and they're able to congregate outside and have a good time. It creates a sense of community. I have to say, I can't say this for a fact, but I'm pretty sure that they probably had never even considered the possibility of opening a beer garden. And if they did, the city probably wouldn't let them do it. But that changed because COVID forced everybody to be more creative and to be willing to try things that they would not be willing to try before. But of course, when you're dealing, when you're seeing things like this, the other reality is that when you go across the street, right over here, and I'm going to be a little careful here, right across the street, there's basically an encampment of homeless people, where they've sort of taken over the sidewalk and have pitched tents, which you see all over the city. And as I stand here, I see tents down that way, I see tents down that way, I see tents down that way. It is one of the realities of Portland at the moment, and it's one of the things the city's going to have to figure out how to deal with if it's going to have any chance of coming back. One of the other interesting things about Portland that I find as I'm here and I'm walking around is that despite the troubles that Portland is having right now, there's an enormous amount of construction going on. And you can see right behind me, they're going to tear down that building and build something else. A couple of blocks from here, there's going to be a new Four Seasons Ritz-Carlton. Quite frankly, they were planning that before COVID hit. I'm sure they're wondering what exactly they're doing, because they're going to open it probably well before Portland has made any kind of real comeback. It depends, I guess, on the timing. But the other thing is sort of weird is, and I'm here, it's a summer day, and the streets are empty. I mean, there are cars and stuff like that, but there's nobody walking. And one of the things I always liked about Portland is the streets were usually teeming with people. I mean, not teeming, New York teeming or Chicago teeming, but there were always people around. There were always people around. And you just don't see that. Most of the streets are pretty empty. There's not a lot of traffic in the city. Yes, it's the summer. And yes, there's still COVID that people are worried about. But it's this sort of odd combination of vitality in terms of a construction, and yet this kind of eerie quiet that still manages to sort of put a damper on urban excitement. So this is sort of typical of what you see downtown, just blocks from where a lot of the civil unrest was taking place. Glass doors, they've erected these sort of wooden structures that actually will prevent people from getting to the glass. So it's not very becoming looking, but they've had to do that in order to solve some of, a lot of the issues of vandalism that they were dealing with. One of the really interesting things is, you walk along here and you'll see a glass window like these, right, that haven't been touched. But then when you get down here, you can see where stores have begun to board things up, right? And they erected a lot of wood to prevent their windows from being smashed by rioters. And listen, whoever had the plywood concession in Portland and a lot of other cities, quite frankly, did it really well over the past year and a half, because that's what you see a lot of. But there may be nothing quite so sad in Portland, at least from my perspective, and I'm coming to you from my position on things, is what's behind me here. So this is the Apple Store in downtown Portland, and I've talked about this Apple Store before a number of times. This is actually the last Apple Store that Steve Jobs was involved with designing, and as you can see, they had at one point to board up their windows because it's all glass. Now they've taken down the board and they basically erected a steel cage around it so people can't get to it. And they have security guards everywhere. This is an example of the reality in which Portland is living at the moment. And it's, the only word I can find for it is really, it's sad. It's grim, it's disappointing, but mostly it's sad. And I do have to wonder, how long it will take Portland to be able to get beyond all this and to actually begin to move forward. I simply don't know. I know I'm rooting for it. This is a city that I've always thought of as being a second home, and frankly, would have loved to have had a second home here. Not sure I'm going to do that anytime soon. But I'm rooting for Portland, and I look forward to next summer when hopefully I'll be able to come back, teach regularly at Portland State and see that the city has moved forward in ways that it needs to go. Anyway, that's what's on my mind this morning. And as always, I want to hear what's on your mind.